Hi, I'm Scott Jensen, former Assembly Speaker,
And I'm Chuck Chvala, former Senate Majority Leader.
and we're the Insiders. And once again, we're talking about Ron Johnson and the U.S. Senate race of 2022. We've talked about this a number of times before, Chuck, but there's a new name that's being suggested out there that Congressman Ron Kind from the La Crosse area might run for that seat. What do you think?
Well, it's possible. Ron Kind has spoken on various occasions about running statewide. He has never pulled the trigger and done that. And there's a reason that he hasn't done that, and why very few people do. Because if you do, you have to give up your seat in the House of Representatives, and that's a pretty important position to have, and you have a lot of impact on public policy. So I think that it isn't a done deal. I think Ron Kind also has to face the prospect that is he, as a moderate, able to win a Democratic primary, and maybe with multiple progressives in the primary, maybe he can. But I do think that Ron would be a strong candidate, and I think a lot of people would consider him such. On the other hand, he'd have to give up that seat. And the only person I can remember recently who took on a statewide race and gave up their seat wasn't it Congressman Green, who then, of course, lost to Doyle.
He ran for governor.
Yeah,
also, Mark Newman, I think, ran for the United States Senate, as I recall.
And neither one of them succeeded. So there's not a good history there on what's happening. But here's the thing: Ron Johnson is a different case. This is a person who will go down in history as the worst Wisconsin U.S. senator ever. And he's in some pretty tough company with Joe McCarthy. How can you find a guy? But let me just read to you what he said about the January 6th event. He wasn't frightened by the rioters on January 6th because they were, quote, people that love this country, that truly respect law enforcement, would never do anything to break the law, unquote. These are people who killed 3 officers, injured more than 100, broke windows, knocked down doors. And Ron Johnson is still the odds-on guy. If he runs, he will probably not even have a primary in the Republican Party. This man is an example of what is a threat to our democracy, a clear threat to the Republic. And the fact that Ron Johnson is still viable, not only viable, but robustly supported by the Republican Party, is a dangerous thing for our country. And it's really disappointing to me that Wisconsin is a place where this kind of attitude is acceptable. Listen to those words. That is an awful situation, Scott. How can this guy be your nominee?
Yeah, I think he swung and missed there. That should have been an easy answer. I think if you ask people, is what happened at the United States Capitol good or bad? Was it right or wrong? I think most people are going to say that was a bad thing. It was wrong for people to storm the Capitol like that, regardless of their political beliefs. That's sacred ground in some ways in a democracy. So I don't think that was a smart statement on behalf of the United States Senator. With regards to Ron and what he's going to be doing this year, Ron Johnson, he's already said he's not running for governor. He said he's probably not going to run for re-election. Don't think he's going to let everyone know his answer until the fall. I think he just feels like that would make him a lame duck in the office that he's in. And he's got some things he'd still like to do. I do think he's leaning towards maintaining his status as a citizen legislator, having come off the bench from business to serve a couple terms in Washington and then go back home. I think that's his preference. I think it's his family's preference. If that's the case, I think we've got a strong field on the Republican side of people who want to run for that seat. I think you make a good point, though, that perhaps what I would consider to be the strongest candidate on the Democratic side, Ron Kind, or one of the strongest candidates, is probably too moderate to make it out of a Democratic primary. That'd be very difficult for him. He might still do it, though, because his seat is trending Republican. And I don't know that redistricting is going to do him any favors. So that seat is getting to be tougher and tougher turf for him to defend. This last election was the closest one he's had. If Ron Kind isn't in the race, I think the Dems would be smart to go with Sarah Godlewski as the candidate. I think she would be a fresh face. I don't think Alex Lasry is going to make it as far as you would think his money might take him. I don't think the state's ready to elect a 3rd senator from New York. I think that's just unlikely to happen here. So there are some good candidates on both sides of the aisle. I think that race will be hotly contested. And when I talk to people to make estimates on what that race will cost in Wisconsin, people are talking about $150 million being spent, money coming from all over the country to decide who the next United States Senator is from Wisconsin. That will be much,
Well,
much more than the governor's race. It will affect the governor's race.
What's remarkable to me, though, and I think your analysis isn't unsound on a lot of these things, although there are more Democratic candidates. There's Thomas Nelson, who I think is the hardest working Democrat in politics. I don't know as much about the workings on the Republican side. There's a young man, I'm trying to remember his name, who's involved with nonprofits out of Milwaukee, who's thinking of running. I've heard that there's an African-American minister who's thinking of running. There are a variety of different people out there. So I think the field is yet to be set. And Ron Kind would certainly be a good addition to that field. And by the way, with a larger field, he has a much better chance of winning the primary. But what's disturbing to me is that it appears that Ron Johnson, his statements have not engendered yet 1 ounce of any Republican in the state of Wisconsin saying, you know, you should step aside. You shouldn't be doing this. And you know what? The Democrats, when they were faced with a person who was willing to destroy the Republic, George Wallace, Democrats resoundingly said no. And we've had a lot of problems in the South since then, but for a good reason. For a good reason, racism. We got away from it. And I'll tell you what, when Andrew Cuomo started to have problems, a lot of Democrats raised their voices. Scott, there's something with your party. I don't know who's going to do it, but somebody has to speak up, because Ron Johnson is a threat to the Republic, and he needs to be addressed in that fashion. And if he isn't, that's bad for our Republic and bad for the state of Wisconsin.
Well, we'll have to disagree on that last point, but we will see you all next week.